Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
All right. So thank you, Don. I am Sridhar Sudarsan, CTO for SparkCognition. I'm fairly recent to SparkCognition, so this is my first-time machine. I have been working with the artificial intelligence space for several years now, and really would love to have a conversation with you here, Darryl. So why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about your background and all the wonderful work that you've done in heat, mobility, and energy.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. I'm Darryl Willis, and I joined Google about 7 months ago after 25 years with BP, and started my career as a physicist, a geophysicist, and really have always been fascinated with technology from back in the late 80s, early 90s when I joined BP. And one of the things I've continued to observe is that the industry has been really good at leveraging technological advances at the surface and even in the subsurface when it comes to things like hydraulic fracturing and leveraging horizontal drilling, even working with various proppants in the onshore U.S., as well as doing things with dissolvable plugs. Lots of technology has been applied at the surface, but the other thing I observed is that this industry that I've spent most of my life working in loves data, has an insatiable appetite for data. And I also know that the industry only uses between 1% and 5% of the data that it has access to. And that represents a very, very big opportunity as we think about the future, particularly through the lens of artificial intelligence and more specifically, machine learning. I think that the oil and gas industry is overdue for a transformation. I think everyone's talking about it. Every company's thinking about it. But the pace at which the change is occurring in the industry is very, very slow. And it's got to pick up. We saw some amazing examples in the opening presentation on healthcare and some of the things that are happening in the healthcare space. And my question is, what are the equivalent types of things that are happening in the energy space, whether it's oil and gas or utilities, whether it's mining or even utilities and power? I think there's a huge opportunity. Innovation does occur in the industry, but we've not done it in the context of digits and digitization. So I think that's a huge opportunity for us. I also believe that the future is about survival of the fastest, not survival of the biggest. And typically in this industry, in our industry, and I still see myself as a part of the industry, although I live in both worlds, there was a period in time where bigger was thought to be better. And I think that is transitioning from bigger being better to faster versus slower. And if you're not fast and safe, you will lose. And I think there's an opportunity for this industry, our industry, to pick up the pace in terms of how we make decisions, the rate at which we make decisions, and also the insights we're able to get from the data that we have access to. Things just take too long. It takes 12 months, for example, to process a seismic data set and deliver those volumes to geoscientists at their desktop. Why can't it be done in a month? It takes at least a month to plan a well, in some cases longer. Why can't it be done in a day? It takes 6 months to build a prospect inventory in the oil and gas industry. Why can't it be done in 6 days? So I think we've got to think about how we challenge the pace at which things are done, and then we have to leverage data and analytics to do them a lot faster. I guess the last thing I'd say is that artificial intelligence and machine learning is here to stay. It's not going to blow over. It is here to stay, and companies who leverage it will win, and companies who don't will lose. And if companies think, or organizations or individuals think that it's going to blow over and just pass, it's not. It's a powerful tool. I think it's been said already, it's not designed to be a replacement for human beings, but to be an assistant. And I think partnering with AI and ML as we think about how to deliver business value can be hugely transformational going forward. So AI is an assistant. It is not a replacement for what we bring as subject matter experts and scientists to the oil and gas industry, or from where I sit today inside of Google to the technological industry.
Very good. It's fascinating to me, as I was reading about, one of the things that stands out to me is back in the 19th century when U.S. companies were processing crude oil, really they were after kerosene, right? And so gasoline, the rest of the vaporized content was all thrown into the river, including gasoline, right? Whatever the nearest river was, it was just discarded. The trend that shifted that was the adoption, the invention, and the growth of automobiles. I think, picking up on something you said, to me, it is very interesting you mentioned data being a key resource. You know, we often say that data is the new oil. So oil has become sort of almost intrinsic to all of our lives. And I think we're at this cusp where, picking up on what you said, the artificial intelligence is kind of the invention, and the adoption and the growth of artificial intelligence technologies is doing what we did with oil back when the automobiles were invented, and really being able to use and consume a lot more of this data in a more intelligent, more efficient manner. So just from your perspective, as you've spent over 25 years in the industry, sort of from the inside, trying to influence the change, and now you've taken this leap coming into Google and trying to drive the change from the outside, as a technologist first, I guess it's probably always going to be a mixed hat two hats that you're going to wear. But
It is.
How do you see that sort of impacting as you're talking to companies? Where do you see are the top sort of areas that data is really influencing, and how is AI technologies applying there?
I think that I'll say a few things. I think the first thing is that I think companies get it intellectually, that they need to be in this conversation around how to better leverage data. But I think that there's an underappreciation for the cultural component to this journey. There's a leadership component to this journey. So what I've observed is that companies that are moving the fastest and having the most success are companies where there's a lot of momentum at the front line, in the front lines of the organization, but there's also executive sponsorship in the C-suite. And that makes a huge difference. I also find that companies who have the courage to partner and create unusual partnerships that may involve folks inside of the industry, but also may involve folks outside the industry, is incredibly powerful. I think there are lots of similarities, for example, between the journey that the healthcare industry has been on in life sciences and oil and gas. Whether you think about the brain as being analogous with a reservoir, or you think about MRIs and PET scans being similar to seismic data, or other parts, other subsurface information. I think there are lots of similarities between the industries. They've both got lots of data, but healthcare seems to be a little bit further down the road. So I think looking for the leadership inside of companies, also being willing to form unusual partnerships, is very important. The third thing that's really important, and I've observed as I've kind of traveled around talking to various companies, is you've got to have the courage to run the experiment and try something. And you have to be willing to fail fast and keep trying. And if something works, you've got to be willing to scale. My observation with the oil and gas industry in particular is that we have perfected the art of POCs, proof of concepts, but we've not perfected the art of scale. And the opportunity comes in the scaling of success, and that's been a big missing.
Very interesting. It's fascinating you mentioned scale, because as we talked earlier, the ability to take the massive amounts of data that, again, compared, using the same analogy as we said earlier, companies were mostly discarding before because they didn't know what to do with that data. Now we're at a point where we have technologies, we have a lot of fundamental technologies in order to mine that data for information that can then be used for insight. There is a shift, and I love your the concept, the point that you made about needing to fail fast, because there is a lot of experimentation that you're doing. There's a lot of technologies that you're applying, which is potentially the proof of concept phase, but then as you scale that, it does seem sometimes overwhelming. So do you find that as you talk to some of these champions, that the challenges that they're facing, they're more open to the technologies that we're seeing right now? Because obviously we are shifting how we're going after the unknown unknowns, right? Which is a lot of discovery of information from data.
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting point. My experience so far, and I've been talking to oil and gas companies in North America, in Europe, in Asia in particular, as well as utility companies and some mining companies and the like. And my experience so far has been that companies are really trying to get their heads around how to proceed. But there's been a lot of fear around. For me, the big thing has been there's been a fear around failing that has really truly paralyzed the industry, and I worry that companies will not try, and I worry that companies will revert back to the old way of doing things, old way of doing things, and not transform themselves, in particular in the oil and gas industry, given the fact that the oil price is back in the 80s. And I think there's a lot of urgency that was created, for example, for the industry and when the oil price was in the 50s, but I can feel the pressure starting to subside as folks begin to relax as the oil price has moved up. So I'm not sure if I answered your question.
No, I think it'd be really good to. You did actually, and
Yeah.
I was trying to see if you can perhaps for the benefit of our friends here, share an example or two where you have seen a good sort of success path, a methodology where
Great.
you've seen something that actually works as they've been able to take the data
Great.
in. Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying that. So I'll give a couple of examples. So I think of one. We've done some interesting work in Google on our data centers. Data centers are at the backbone of everything we do. We've got we have 7 products that have over 1 billion users each. And behind those products sits an incredible amount of infrastructure and security, and frankly, a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning that fuse search and Android and G Suite and photos. And so there's an incredible amount of expertise that has been accumulated inside of Google that sits behind everything that we do. So we ran an experiment with our data centers to see if we could apply machine learning to optimize the cooling costs associated with a data center. And interestingly enough, that's typically been a pretty manual process, but we decided to take this technology and apply it to a business problem. And what we observed was about a 30 to 40% reduction in cooling costs when we turned over the optimization of the plant, and it is a plant, to the machines. That was a very interesting experiment. So what's happened over the last several months is an energy company in Europe, oil and gas company in Europe, Repsol, came to us and said, we want to see if you guys can help us optimize a refinery. And we said, let's run that experiment. This is a bigger problem than we're used to solving. In the data center, we have 30 to 40 variables that we're trying to optimize over. In the refinery that we're working on with Repsol, we're trying to optimize over 400 variables. And so the question becomes, can you solve that problem? And we believe it's solvable. They're willing to try, and if it works, then we'll apply it to the other 6 refineries inside their portfolio in Spain. So I think that's a great example of where we're trying to take some capability that we've applied internally and apply it to the industry. They have the courage to try. We'll see what happens. The other thing I would say is that every oil company is struggling with how do they access information from data that sits in archives and data that sits on people's desktops. In some cases, some scientists still have workstations at their desktop. And so there's lots of information that's been accumulated over the course of decades that is lost because no one knows where it is and what is actually in some of these files. And so we're working using some of our vision capability to see how we can extract information quickly and make it accessible and available to scientists so it can be incorporated into new insights in old basins, frankly, where companies are working. That's another example. A third example is one where we've been talking with an Australian company about the fact that the worst time of day for someone who works in a plant is a shift change. And a shift change because of the fact that you have to type in your notes and summarize everything that's going on over the previous shift. And I was talking to the CTO of this company, and he said, Darryl, it's very interesting because we thought that when we introduced the computer into the shift change, that was introducing technology. And he said it actually slowed down the process of the shift change for a person who's not a touch typist, because you have a person pecking with 2 fingers trying to type in a report. But if there was a way we could use your natural language processing capabilities to have a person speak their shift change in whatever language they speak in and have it translated into whatever language it needs to be translated, if there's a way to do that, you can transform the shift handover for someone who works in an LNG facility, someone who works on an FPSO or on a drilling rig. And so those are the kinds of problems that we're starting to think about as we engage with the industry in particular. And the last thing I'll say is that Google is really into solving big, hard problems. So the bigger the problem, the harder the problem, those are the things we want to be involved in. And we are looking for companies that are up to solving big problems and working with partners like SparkCognition to solve some of these big problems.
Yep. No, it's fascinating because I think you're absolutely right. Picking up on a point that you mentioned earlier about the companies of different sizes sort of working together in this ecosystem of trying to solve some of these very complex challenges, some of these really hard problems, it does require innovation coming from a variety of different places. And I think applying machine learning technologies, as you mentioned, whether it's on structured data, being able to collate this information to really make it consumable by the right person. In this case, the person who is sort of at that shift change, which is very different from a manager of a team who is trying to predict how to allocate resources versus from a scientist perspective in terms of where to sort of spend the extra research budget on. It's just a fascinating set of challenges, and I think again, thank you very much, Darryl, for sharing this. I think the key thing that I take away from this session is about how data is really critical in this industry as in general, and I think you mentioned energy efficiency being a case which is true really across the board. And scaling data in a company and scaling the use of data in a company often gets associated with the use of data scientists, right? And so it really translates into how do you actually work with data to find the right kinds of insights. And it often gets associated with growing a team of data scientists, which then shifts the problem to another area in terms of how do you scale the number of people? How do you scale the number of data scientists with the right level of skills? And this is where technologies really come in, and some of this you'll hear coming up, but technologies that come in to help scale that challenge. So we're thinking ahead in terms of how we can resolve some of these challenges as well. So again, thank you very much, Darryl, for joining us and sharing your insights here.
Thank you. It's great.
Very good.